Thanks for staying with us here on Newstalk. Bruce DePuyt with you on this Wednesday. Newt Gingrich's presidential campaign got off to such a poor start, the former House Speaker's White House bid was written off completely by all the so-called experts. But now the Georgia Republican is skyrocketing in the polls. He has emerged, for this week at least, as the most likely candidate to challenge longtime frontrunner Mitt Romney for the GOP nomination. Can Gingrich do it? Can he emerge victorious despite all his baggage and his tendency to commit self-inflicted wounds? Craig Shirley is with us. Mr. Shirley is a veteran conservative activist, PR man, and author. His new book is about the month that saw the U.S. get dragged into World War II. It is called December 1941, 31 Days That Changed America and Saved the World. Welcome and thanks very much for coming in. It's good to have you with us.
Thank you.
70 years next month. Yeah. Hard to believe.
Yeah, astonishing, isn't it? That means that some of the, and I think there's only 100 or 200 veterans left who were there at Oahu at Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941, and they're in their, the very best, they're in their late 80s. So it's a story that's important to tell and keep retelling. And
important for us to connect as much as we can with folks who made history, who served at a crucial time, because yeah, you know, we have their writing and we have, you know, we have them on videos or whatever, but the more stories we can get, basically, the better. Right. From this special generation. And the reason I did this is because this aspect of American history has not been told before in this way. There have been many, many books about the war, many terrific books about the war. There have been many books about December 7th. Of course, Gordon Prague's At Dawn We Slept is from the University of Maryland. Right, is the standard by which everybody is measured against. Nobody will ever surpass his account of December 7th. But I chose to do it about the entire month because of the radical changes this country goes through from December 1st to December 31st, because it's an entirely different country and it's remade over by war, but also by the culture and how it changed. I didn't know the history that you just mentioned, where I didn't fully know the significance of Professor Sprague's book, but I interviewed him as a student when I was at the University of Maryland. Right? So it's interesting you had mentioned that. More about your book in a moment. Let's talk about Newt Gingrich. He was written off. I mean, forget it, put a sock in it, it's over. His campaign got off to such a bad start, and here he is. Astonishing, isn't it? Potentially the main rival. What's going on? Well, I think that there is always a void on the right to take on Mitt Romney. Mitt Romney has never been a favorite of conservatives. He never could break out of that 25% that he's been, you know, trapped in for the last 5 years. He still hasn't broken out of it. There is the 75% of populist Reaganite conservatives in the party just are too resistant to ever supporting Mitt Romney, at least in the primaries. So there was always a void there. The question is who's going to step in to fill that void. We've seen candidates come back and forth. But Gingrich now has emerged, and a lot of people are starting to think that he might not be part of the narrative of a candidate who bubbles up and then sinks back, that because of his history with the conservative movement, with conservatives, with Reagan, you know, in the 80s and the 70s, is that he might be the one to emerge as the conservative populist Reaganite challenger to Mitt Romney. It remains to be seen. You know, there's a lot of pitfalls along the way. Romney has an enormous amount of money. He moved to New Hampshire from Massachusetts to establish residency there. That ploy may work for him in New Hampshire, but that remains to be seen. But I will say this, is that this is probably the most wide open Republican contest since 1940, when there was really no front runner, and Wendell Willkie, who was a business executive in Indiana, came out of nowhere to win the nomination and beat you know, Bob Taft, who was senator from Ohio, and Alf Landon, who was the nominee in '36. So this is going to be one of the most fascinating Republican nomination contests in recent memory. Could Gingrich be the guy to carry the GOP banner into the general in a way that polls moderates and independents? Because I think the history is colorful, to say the least. It depends on how he runs. If he runs as a traditional Republican
that's going to be more problematic because of the ceiling of the number of Republicans. If he runs as an outsider, populist, conservative, and basically he broadens the base by narrowing his appeal.
Is that even doable given the Fannie Mae controversies, to say nothing about all the rest?
I think so, because people look at his experience, they look, and they're looking at their own experience, and they're looking at what they've gone through for the last 4 years, and they're looking for solutions. So one thing I hear about Gingrich over and over and over is from interviewing people about the book that I'm working on about him is that they look at these debates and they say he's the only one who makes sense, and I hear that from astonishingly people who voted for Obama in 2008. We were at my son's football game the other day, and my wife and I were standing on the sidelines, and we were talking to a teacher from the school, and she just blurted out, we were just watching the game, she just blurted out, "I'm for Gingrich." And one of the other parents says, "What about the baggage?" And she responded, she said, "We all have baggage." I think a lot of people are getting past his past and to allow themselves to support him. And I think that's a significant step that's going on out there.
There's been a lot of talk about how Mitt Romney has a lot of things going for him.
Right.
He's got money. He's been a consistent leader in the polls.
Right.
When you look at some of the hypothetical matchups on a state-by-state basis, which are arguably, given the Electoral College, more important than the national horse race, which is kind of fun but maybe sort of meaningless, there are consistent polls that show that Obama beats anyone from the GOP except for Romney, and that if it's Romney as the Republican, then he may eke out a narrow victory over President Obama. Is it possible that this process, if he emerges victorious, that with the crowning moment of the convention, that we'll sort of forget some of the, I don't want to say whining, but some of the complaining that you hear about him?
Winning salves a lot of wounds. Winning changes a lot of, and dismisses a lot of those old arguments. At this time, in 1979, Ronald Reagan was 30 points behind Jimmy Carter in the polls. And of course, we know what the outcome of that one was. So that situation was extraordinarily fluid. This situation is extraordinarily fluid. And so it's, it's up to Gingrich and what type of campaign he decides to wage, and how he allocates his resources, and what type of campaign that Mitt Romney decides to wage. But I do think that in many ways, Gingrich, for the first time, is in control of his own destiny.
Barack Obama will not hurt. He will not be hurting for money as he goes into the general. He'll probably have more money. Yes. Correct me if I'm wrong. Than anyone else who's ever sought
history.
The job.
In history.
Probably maybe not $1 billion, but
well,
many
they're talking
hundreds.
about last 4 years ago, 3 years ago, it was well over $1 billion when he considered the independent money spent and the money spent by his campaign. It was well over $1 billion. And now that he's had 4 years of incumbency and he's raising money hand over fist now, is that I would expect that he's going to. I think most people expect that he's going to surpass what he raised 3 years ago.
But the numbers on the economy and on jobs and consumer confidence and the rest suggest, if you're strictly going by history, this guy's a one-termer. So we have the money on the one hand, the tough economy on the other. Talk about
he's not getting
the sort of things they're trying to work through within the Obama high committee.
Because of the bad economy, he's not getting the small contributors. But after
but I mean in terms of
3 years
being a
power,
referendum on the incumbent.
Oh, well, these are always a referendum on the incumbent. All elections are, and it's whether you vote for change or the status quo. In 1980, it was change versus status quo, and people voted for the change of Ronald Reagan. In 1984, it was change versus status quo. Status quo was then Reagan. Walter Mondale was change, but people opted for the status quo because they were happy with it. This time around, are they going to vote for the change of whoever the Republican nominees or the status quo of Barack Obama? Obama understands this. He is a very intelligent political animal. His operation is all political. His White House has always been all political, and so they understand that he doesn't have a record to run on, or that the record they run on is not the one that the American people want to hear about. Because obviously, based on all the polling, based on the joblessness, based on all the other problems in the economy, there's a lot of dissatisfaction out there. So the only thing he can do is what Carter tried to do in 1980. Carter didn't have a record to run on, so he ran a campaign to try to destroy Ronald Reagan. Obama will do the same thing. He will try to run a campaign to try to destroy the Republican nominee.
We have a little bit of about a minute left for this segment. What do you make of the outsized role that debates have played played so far in the GOP nomination
It's
process.
astonishing, isn't it? And I guess they're real ratings winners for the cables and the networks that have been broadcasting them, is that they become the new pre-primary, the new first primary, and it's really good because it's allowed people who didn't have financial resources, lesser candidates, to make their case to the American people. You know, what's interesting is that somebody did a time study of all the debates, and Rick Santorum and Newt Gingrich have been allocated about as much time up until several debates ago. But where Santorum's been stuck in the polls, Gingrich has rocketed up.
Much larger presence on stage.
But because it's what he's done with the time that has made the difference.
I need a quick answer. You were here in the studio earlier. Does Buddy Roemer deserve to be on stage? Honest answer.
I'd put him on stage, sure, absolutely.
Former governor, former congressman?
governor, former congressman, sure, why not? Yeah.
Talking with Craig Shirley, the author of the new book, December 1941. We'll take a break. We'll come back with more News Talk right after this.
I don't.
Continuing our conversation now here on News Talk with veteran Republican strategist, PR man, and again author Craig Shirley. His new book is called December 1941, 31 Days That Changed America and Saved the World. Impossible to imagine Pearl Harbor being 70 years ago next month, so I know this will have an eager audience. By the way, let me open the phone lines. If you have a quick question or comment for Mr. Shirley about politics or about his book, we'd love to keep the phone calls coming. So, open lines, 703-387-1020. Call now. I'd love to hear from you. We'll go to the phones as your questions and comments come in. My buddy Dave Lucas tells me that John Meacham, who as far as I'm concerned, hung the moon, was on MSNBC yesterday, and he said, I'm so depressed. You've written the book that he wishes he had written.
Yeah, but I was on the show with him yesterday. I said, in fairness, he's written books that I wish I'd written. So, but it was very nice of John. He's a wonderful historian and terrific writer.
So, what is it you're trying to get at and have gotten at here in this work?
Well, is that most books about World War II have been about the military aspect. This is about America from a political standpoint, from a cultural standpoint, from a military standpoint, from a standpoint of family and all the things that were going on in this in America between the 1st and the 31st of December. And we went very, very deeply into newspapers all over the country. We went very deeply into wire dispatches and AP and UPI and shortwave radio, the files from the Roosevelt Library, files from Henry Stimson, who was Secretary of War, Claude Wickard, who was Secretary of Agriculture, Cordell Hull, who was the Secretary of State, and then extensive bibliography to produce this book, which documents day by day. Each chapter is one day, so there's 31 chapters in the life of America from the 1st to the 31st, and the radical, radical changes the country goes through.
Every gauge of where we are politically and culturally shows that we're this 50-50 nation, red and blue, divided, sometimes not even talking to each other. We talk or we yell past each other. Has there been a time in the 70 years since Pearl Harbor was attacked where we were more united than we were then? No.
No. As a matter of fact, if you go to July 4th, 1776, if you go to April of 1861, if you go to 1917, if you go to September 11th, 2001, in any of those instances, the country was not nearly as united as it was after December 7th, 1941. There was not any opposition to going to war with the Empire of Japan and then later Italy and Nazi Germany. There was one member of Congress, Jeanette Rankin, who voted against going to war with Japan, and then when the vote came to go to war with Germany and Italy, she abstained. But she's the only one, and she actually did it on very principled reasons. She said, I can't go to war myself, and I don't feel like I can ask other people to go fight for me. She later was driven out of Congress, but it was a very nuanced and principled argument, but it just happened to be wrong at the wrong time. But the country was very willing to hand over to FDR all the powers that he needed to conduct the war. Through the War Powers Act, the government essentially took over the whole commercial radio industry. They could shut down any radio station that broadcast information that they thought would undermine the war effort. They took over the mail. All mail going out of the country, coming into the country was controlled by the government.
there's evidence that Roosevelt had pretty good information about what was happening in Europe, but didn't feel maybe that he could get us to
great political opposition.
So did Pearl Harbor, an attack by the Japanese, lead us in a significant way to war in Europe?
This is interesting because there's a 4-day period in between December 7th when we're attacked, and then we declare war on December 8th. But even after that, we declare war on Japan. There is no will in this country. There's no interest. I detected nothing. No editorial, no political comments, no congressman or senator said we need to now go after Germany and Italy until on December 11th, Germany and Italy declare war on us because they had a mutual defense treaty with Japan. So then we declare war on them in response. But it was much more, okay, I guess we're going to get into it, whereas everybody was gung-ho about going to war with Japan.
The new book is called December 1941, 31 Days That Changed America and Saved the World. I hope you'll come back. I've got a million more questions about this and politics. I hope you'll come back very soon. Craig Shirley, thanks very much. Happy Thanksgiving to you. We're back with a program note right after this.